Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me today on what is International Women's Day for the first part of a two-part series. In this first part of the series, we will review some of the risks which affect all travelers and how they can impact you, your employees, or your clients. And then we will review the risks as they are associated with women. We will highlight areas for you to consider when reviewing your travel program, and then leave you with some takeaways that you can utilize immediately. In the second part of this program, my esteemed colleague, Maria Teresa Septon, will review how you can help reduce the risks and how to help support the female traveler should an incident occur. That will be occurring next week. During this presentation, I am going to actually pose questions to you and to help challenge you in the attempt for you to think about your travel program holistically. So as I ask these questions, they're meant to garner you this start to think about your programs, think about what you have, what you don't have, what is working, what is not working. So feel free to take these questions as just a deeper dive into your program. First, a brief background about myself. I am the Director of Strategic Development for FocusPoint International. I have been in the travel risk industry for many years and have over 20 years of helping multinational companies find solutions for their needs. In keeping up with my clients, it has kept me crisscrossing the globe and on constant friendly terms with the TSA for years. This topic, which we are about to discuss, is near and dear to my heart, considering that since most of the time I am a solo female traveler. Please feel free to reach out to me at the email listed with any questions you may have. I'll be more than happy to talk to you further in depth about it. In your current environment, does your travel program highlight the do's and the don'ts of its policy? For example, does it point out what is allowed in off-company time? Are you or your travelers able to explore the city and take a few days off afterwards and have a mixed-use trip, business trip, or as a bleeder, as we like to call it? Are ride-sharing programs like Lyft and Uber allowed? Or are you or your travelers tasked with taking taxis, public transportation, self-driven cars, or do you have a designated car service that you are tasked to use? Is travel allowed outside of the business destination? And how does your program account for leisure or mixed-use activities? If an employee decides to take a train from the UK to Paris, but they did not inform you, how are you able to account for them? Should an incident arise similar to what occurred in Nice in those attacks. Today we will begin to look at things holistically to help you find a way to help incorporate these potential risks into your program and provide the duty of care which is necessary. We will highlight key areas where risk can materialize and provide insight on how to meet those challenges. Is part of your travel program taking the presumptive approach to travel? Is it assumed that the traveler is taking the time to research their destination and taking the necessary steps to ensure that they are up to date for the risks that they may face? Or are you or your program manager having the conversations about communication and the types of travel? As I mentioned previously, leisure and mixed travel all present different risks and challenges. And are the traveler aware of what those risks are in each? We will explore how your organizations can prepare and support the trips for the female traveler and best identify the proactive support. The world is growing smaller every day. We have the ability to speak to our clients, our colleagues, our friends, and our family across the globe in real time through a variety of means, through social media, through texting, tweeting, calling, and video chatting. We can visit in a moment's notice and hop onto a train, plane, or automobile to have that face-to-face contact. Having the world at our fingertips can breed complacency. We begin to forget that there are real risks out there. And while we are in frequent contact with our clients across the globe and know them really well, we're not truly immersed in their culture or their environment. The world may be growing virtually smaller, but the risks are not. Two of the questions which I most frequently hear when discussing travel risk management programs is, but Lisa, my employees do not go to risky environments. Why do I need to be aware of such small risks? Or one of the other questions that I hear most often is, well, we don't travel internationally, so why do I need to inform them about what's happening in their own country? In these next couple of slides that I'm going to show, we're going to highlight why you need to be aware. Natural disasters have been on the rise significantly since the 1970s. Earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and other similar events occur not only in remote islands, but also in your own country. When you look at this geographical illustration of where natural disasters have occurred in 2016, you can see that with the exception of Greenland, which was exempt from any natural disasters, every country has been affected by something. If you had an employee or a client which were traveling to New Orleans for business when the floods hit, would you have been able to have the ability to communicate to them? Would you have been able to get them out of the situation? And if not, how would you have been able to make sure that your travelers were safe in the Superdome if that is where they were ultimately placed? That event that I'm discussing quickly went from a natural disaster to an evacuation scenario, and then very quickly into a security risk for those left on the ground. Being a domestic event, it made it no less traumatic to the person being affected by it. When you look into your programs, you should look to see how you would have been able to respond if a natural disaster and domestic events are covered under your travel management program. Unfortunately, we can't go a day without reading or hearing about terrorism in the news. It's no longer relegated to the Middle East. Terrorism events have been spreading across the globe at a rapid pace, and no longer can you call a country safe from potential terrorism events. If you think back to the recent Paris attacks, most companies would never have thought that sending an employee to that city, that they would be at risk of a terrorism event and that they might potentially have to evacuate one of their employees out or to ensure that they were safe. Yet when the shootings occurred, employees and travelers and clients were all affected. If you had an employee who was traveling in that area, how would you have been able to locate them? The other piece of this is if an employee was in that area and they decided to take a brief side trip to Bordeaux, did you have the communication protocols in place for them to notify you so that you knew that they were okay? Would you have been able to take all of these pieces of the pie that existed and ensure that they were out of harm's way? Being able to travel quickly throughout the world has been an economic and cultural boom, although with this ability to travel far and wide brings the ability to be exposed to diseases and to transport those diseases home. Diseases are no longer landlocked to their geographical region. Anyone who has ever been sick abroad knows how difficult and frustrating it can be to find quality care, to find the right medications, to find the right hospitals, or even just to find a nice calming place to relax. Not knowing where you can go can add stresses to travel and put them at risk of having the illness escalate. If you were traveling domestically or internationally and became ill, do you know how you would find quality care? Or how do you get to the facility to help you? If you live in Boston but you had to travel to LA and you suddenly came down with what you thought was either an allergic reaction or the flu, do you know which hospitals were the ones that you needed to go to or how best to call a cab or an ambulance? These are all, even though they're domestically, you may not know where the right place to go to is. In 2014, two women were hiking through Ecuador when they found themselves short on cash. They reached out to their friends for advice as to where they could stay for free. Their friends came back with a suggestion to stay with two male acquaintances. These women took the advice and contacted the men. Unfortunately for them, they were raped and murdered by those men. While taking this as a leisure trip, you can easily think about it in the business environment that it is doubtful that these women would not have a place to stay. But what would happen if their credit cards didn't work? What protocol do they have to reach out and say, hey, I don't have any cash or my credit cards aren't working? How best can you support them when they're in a foreign country for that? Or if they went to social media to ask for advice as to where to go to eat or to see a show. We live in such a social media environment and are quick to tweet, text, or post the locations of where we are if we're alone and to ask for advice. How often have you done this looking for a restaurant where you just quickly put onto Facebook, hey, I'm in London, where's the best place for Thai? We send out all of this information, and then once we get it back, do you vet that information and where it's coming from? We inadvertently announce to the world that we are soft targets without realizing it. As you try and think about your program, analyze if you have a company policy on activities for off time and how to communicate locations as they're going. These risks that I just discussed become heightened when considering the fact that 1 out of every American woman has been a victim of an attempted or completed assault in their lifetime. 1 out of every 6 women. A woman is raped every 2 minutes. These statistics become even more daunting for LGBT. In that case, 43% of lesbian or bisexual women and 30% of gay or bisexual men have reported having experienced at least one form of sexual victimization. In total, 9 out of 10 victims of rape are women. While what we are discussing can be applied to women and men, it is apparent that we need to focus on mitigating the risks for travel for women. Their chances of assault are far greater than that of the male traveler. We as corporations have a duty to care about our female travelers and their safety. As we start to help you put controls and additional controls to help mitigate that risk, you as each company should understand that you're going to have to take it and look at it under a certain lens. Every organization will have their own way of handling how they mitigate the risk for female travelers. It might come down to more than one person travels together. Two females may travel together. That you provide secure transportation in particular locations. That you may develop restrictions on going out at night solo. These are tools that you can help put into place for all travelers. But as you start to look through that lens, you're looking to create a consistency, that you're not doing an adverse selection, that you are considering the risks for both your female and your LGBT, as well as also you're letting it be known that you know the cultural and religious norms of the areas that you're going to, and that you understand the laws that it relates to females. Duty of care is a term that's been commonplace in Europe for many years, but as it becomes more prevalent in the U.S., the duty of care obligation has been previously handled under the OSHA regulation. As travel has expanded, so hasn't the verbiage. So duty of care is becoming more of a common term that we utilize. But essentially, duty of care is the obligation of the company to provide the tools to the employees to be aware and to enable them to be the best stewards of the company. The organization has an obligation to provide the tools, training, and resources to the employees so that they can act in accordance to meet the company requirements. This will also allow them to meet their duty of loyalty that they have to the company. If your employees do not know that there is a potential risk of protests or riots in a particular area that they are traveling to, they cannot act in an appropriate manner. What does it mean? What is the meaning to you if you or your company does not meet the duty of care responsibility? What type of impact would a $100 million lawsuit have to your company? What about a $10 million lawsuit? How about a $42 million lawsuit? What type of financial hit or reputation exposure is your company willing to withstand by failing to meet your corporate duty of care responsibilities? The Hotchkiss School was sued for $42 million when the courts found that they were negligent in meeting their duty of care responsibilities to inform the students and the parents of a potential danger of a tick-borne disease that was prevalent in China. The background of the story is that a student had gone on a school-sponsored hike, and she had walked off of the beaten track and got bit by a tick harboring this disease. Unfortunately, the school took substandard care by not informing the student of the medical ramifications, by not providing her with the appropriate level of care, and by not evacuating her out to the appropriate facility. By not performing these simple steps, she unfortunately has become paralyzed. And the courts have found that Hotchkiss was unable to meet those duty of care responsibilities and awarded them $42 million. If you think about this in a different way, this easily could have been any one of your employees that had decided to go on a hike on a business trip or had decided to visit a certain lake where a disease may have been harboring in the lake for a swim. It could have been any innocent activity that could have been prevented by giving them the information that they needed, by providing them with the information and the destination reports on those countries, on the medical scenario and situation that existed in those countries, as well as giving them the information of what type of vaccines and what type of immunizations that they may need, as well as what hospitals were in the local area that they could go to if they fell ill. All of this brings to the awareness that we need to prepare for our travelers. And particularly, we need to prepare for the female traveler. So how are companies starting to recognize this? In 2016, the Overseas Security Council distributed this graph in correlation with a report. And the graph that they issued was for companies and their major concerns for their female travelers. This was highlighting what the top concerns that they had. And if you look through it, the highest concerns that they have are crime, rape or attempted rape, physical assault, verbal and sexual harassment. By surveying all these multinational companies, these consistently came back as items that they needed to be aware of, that they needed to inform their employees about, as well as provide solutions to how to mitigate that risk. As you sit here and think, well, we don't go to dangerous countries, or we're well versed in the types of assaults that occur in the countries that we go to. But if you look at the top 10 countries for assault for both men and women, you might be surprised to actually see that Sweden and the USA are listed as top 2 dangerous countries to go to. If you're in the USA, that's a domestic assault, meaning that you need to have the conversation with your employees when they travel across country and in particular cities as to how to react, how to report an assault, what the scenario that they're going into, but as well as you may be surprised to see that Sweden is in the top 10. It is a country that most companies would see as a benign country. So as you start to look at this and look at where you're traveling, and if you see that any of these countries that you're traveling to are listed within there, you might need to go back and look into your travel policy in your program is how do you account for this and how do you make adjustments to mitigate that risk. Also within that, the highest crime rate. Again, some of these may not be of surprise to you, but then again, you may see that you do a lot of business in South Africa, and so you might need to adjust how your employees travel to that country. Do you provide secure transportation? Do you provide a security guard to be with them, either undercover or sitting beside them? Do you only require that they go to particular hotels and that they hire car services from that hotel? These little pieces that you could put into place to help mitigate some of the risks against crime. And as we discuss mitigating the risk for women travelers, unfortunately, these are the top 10 worst countries for women to travel to in 2016. While some may not be a shock, for example, India, others may be. And if you start to look at some of that are in there and you notice that Saudi Arabia is on the list and Egypt, you would also need to understand that there are certain laws and regulations that are detrimental to women if they were to report the sexual assault to them. So not only does this bring into the highlight as to which countries you're going to that may provide an increased risk to your female travelers, but it also provides the fact that you need to know the laws of where you're going into and how best to handle a situation should it arise. This graph just highlights the other two, which showcases per rates of 100,000, which countries have the highest rate of assault. As you look through it and you think about where your company travels to, or where your clients travel to, or even where you travel to, it may bring to the forefront either, yep, we know that that occurred, or it may bring to the forefront of, I didn't realize that Australia had such a high assault rate. And how do you handle your female travelers going to that country, and how do you handle the education for them on that piece? As well as this is another brief slide as to the reported case of sexual violence, both rape and sexual assault. So it combines the two. Some of the countries are the exact same from the last slide, and some of them are a little bit different. Again, you need to start looking at where your geographic travel locations are and who your travelers are going into them. And are they prepared for the risk? And if so, how do they communicate to you during that travel? As I mentioned in the previous slide, that you need to know where your travelers are going and what the laws and regulations are in there. One of the highlights on this slide that I unfortunately draw to is the July 13th attack that occurred. During this attack, a Norwegian woman was raped by one of her colleagues, and then she, doing what she thought was best, went and reported it to the local police in Dubai. Unfortunately, due to their laws and regulations, she was jailed for having unlawful sex in Dubai, and her assailant was allowed to go free. Had she known the rules and the regulations and the laws of the country that she was going into, she may have communicated this differently to her travel program manager, to her company, and she may have acted differently. But during the stresses of the emotional event that occurred, she did what she thought was right and what was appropriate in her own country and reported it. And it led to a disastrous consequence. As you can see in some of these other cases, not always is it going to be a colleague or a stranger. If you look in the February 2013 case, the female tourist who went to the Mexican police officers to report that she had been assaulted, she was then subsequently raped by the police officers in that district. So how you handle cases in countries will be different in each country and for each case. But you need to have an understanding that it's not going to be as similar to what you're used to and accustomed to here in the U.S. or in your home country of origin. Just to highlight how some of these laws are different, if you look into some of the countries like Afghanistan, Lebanon, Jordan, and Morocco, where rape and marriage has not been criminalized, there's additional legislation that exists that when a rape victim survivor can face criminal charge, just as what we exampled in Dubai, for adultery and prostitution. That leads you, if you are doing a lot of work in those companies or in the Middle East, that may lead you to have a separate type of training for your female travelers that go into that location, or you may have them partner up with another female in that location so that they are not solo travelers within there. Some of the other countries, again including Morocco, may put pressure on the victim to marry the alleged rapist, which is emotionally damaging for the woman facing it, as well as trying to undo those laws or the pressure from the courts to do that. So as a company handling an assault from a foreign country and then having to actually face these legal frameworks, it could be a daunting task for you. And the UN handbook has actually issued out that many countries around the world do not reach the standards of legislation based on their interpretation. So taking that into consideration, you'll have to understand that each country will be a case-by-case basis. So how do we help you identify the risks of trip or extended travel? I'm going to quickly go through some of these these scenarios so that you might be able to take that and look further into your travel policy. First of all, you need to identify what the risks are. You need to identify what the day-to-day risks occur. Is it something that when a female traveler is going in, is she going into a country which has a high risk of assault? Or is she traveling and she has to utilize public transportation? And does that public transportation, is it safe and secure, or is it overcrowded and the risk of being groped at a higher rate? Some of the other day-to-day risks that you may want to think about is, where is the hotel? Is it in a secluded area? What type of street do our employees need to walk down? The other thing that you need to consider is about the mindset that changes during elongated trips. As we all know, that when we travel, and we travel frequently, that we become very comfortable in our surroundings and we start to feel acclimated to our environment. And how does that start to adjust the risk for your travelers? Do they start to shortcut some of the potential pitfalls that they may face and just bypass some of the protocols and travel policies that you have? As well as, when you have road warriors, a lot of them start to become very acclimated to their lifestyle. So you may want to have continual training as to what the risks that they're facing are, and help them understand that each country and each situation is going to be different. As well as, one thing that you may want to consider is having the discussion with them as to what is the failure for meeting those travel policies. Do they understand that if they decide to change an itinerary and not inform you, or go on a side trip and not inform you on that, that you need to have the ability to reach them should an incident occur in either the location that they're supposed to be in, or if, for example, they had decided to go down to Nice when the attacks occur, that you knew that they were there, so you could help facilitate, get them out. By helping to identify the risks that they may face, helps you in understanding, A, what is going on in their traveler stress, B, understanding what their traveler profile is and what their risk levels are, and C, allowing them to understand the risks that they're facing, as well as letting them have the conversation with you as soon as they understand them. Once they're in country, how does the in-country infrastructure contribute to the risk? By saying this, this is considering both the country viewpoint and the company viewpoint. As your employees travel in there, and especially female employees, how is that company viewed in the country that they're going into? Do they have a favorable view of them, or do they not particularly care for your company doing business in there? Or how is the country viewed? If they're American and they're going into a country where we are not particularly perceived with great flattery, then that might put them at further risk. And what are the actions of the country? How are they continually increasing that risk? So having that conversation with them, and then identifying, do they wear an American flag on their hat, or do they wear their company logo on any of their shirts or coats? Is it putting them out to be an identified risk, and are they creating themselves to become a target for the people in that country? The other piece of this is, how do we create the culture of sustained well-being? When you go back and you think about what your travel policies are, you need to start thinking about, how are you properly supporting your travelers? Are you performing pre-trip, during trip, and post-trip communication? Have you had the ability to do a pre-trip assessment with them, have the hard conversation to understand if there is any, do they have any misgivings about going? Is your current travel policy working in conjunction, or is it not working with your company policy? So, for example, if you have a female traveler that does not feel safe going into a particular hotel or taking a particular car ride service, is she able to switch her hotels, let you know about it without fear of ramifications? either perceived or real. Does your current company culture not work with your travel policy, your current travel policy? And by looking at that, it will help you to facilitate the discussion about how you change your travel policy to help support your female travelers. And then, are you properly training the traveler? And by training the traveler, you're not only training the new people, you're training your program managers as well. Technology changes so fast, and we are always up to date on what the new technology changes are. But are we up to date as to what the new travel policies are? Or are we up to date on new ideas as to help support the travelers and to help mitigate the risks? So not only are you helping your traveler understand the risks and training them as to how to be a safer and better employee when they travel and the best steward of your company, but you're also training the program managers to understand that particular hotels aren't that safe, or having an employee after a long haul flight get into a car and self-drive is putting them in extreme danger. And if you do have female employees that are traveling by themselves, having your program managers trained to understand that they should put them in hotels that are in well-lit locations, or put them in hotels that may have a female-only floor, or provide them with a car and driver so that if they're in an area where taxi cabs are frequently used for kidnap and ransom, that you're not putting them at further risk because they had to grab a cab. The other piece to this is how cultural immersion affects the mentality and impact risks. By having your travelers go, you'll have a small amount of travelers that go for 2 or 3 days, and then some of them you'll have that go for weeks at a time. And understanding that the traveler may have too little or too much cultural understanding or immersion. And a great example of this is actually a personal example that I have. Last year I was doing a multi-country trip in December, and I was able to go through the Netherlands to Germany to Austria and then to Switzerland, and that was over 3 weeks. By the end of my trip, I was traveling around Switzerland as if I was a local. I was getting into the trains without any problem. I was hailing cabs without any problem. I was going to museums. I had become very culturally immersed in the environment that I was. The only problem was that the minute that I opened my mouth, I became a target. It was clear as day that I was a tourist. So I had forgotten that I needed to take steps to help prevent putting myself at further risk. So if you're having travelers that are going on a long and extended trip, it might be beneficial to look into your travel policy and see where you can break up the trip, or actually continually have the conversation and discuss the next location that they're going into, as well as, is the cultural immersion affecting them culturally? Are they security cognizant? Are they understanding of the risks and the potential threat of the locations that they're in and the destinations that they're going to? And are you able to tailor the training and the travel programs as warranted, especially for women going into the Middle East or into Africa, or in some countries where females are not viewed as favorably, as well as you may need to look into what is the sexual orientation of your traveler going into that particular destination, and what is the religious views that they have in going into those destinations. As you start to develop these questions as to how to look holistically at your program, a piece of that is your profile of your traveler. You need to start to kind of understand how they travel and what is their level of travel experience. How do you tailor those education pieces to them? You may have a very experienced traveler that doesn't need to hear about keeping their passport putting their passport into a lock safe, but they may need to hear more about cabs in Mexico, where if they take a yellow cab, those cabs are frequently hijacked and then used for kidnap and ransom. So they may need to understand the nuances of the locations that they're going to so that they can have the company hire them a car or utilize a car service from the actual hotel. You need to look at the physical ability of the traveler going and the activity level. Are you putting too much stress onto your female traveler so that she forgets some of the risks that are a potential pitfall for, and is she able to handle and understand those risks with it, as well as understanding that your risk tolerance as a company and your risk tolerance as a traveler may be two completely different risk tolerances, where a company may have a risk tolerance that is very risk averse, but you have a traveler that feels very experienced and seasoned, and so they feel that they can take additional risks. And by finding what that level of risk tolerance is, it may mean that you have a conversation to them and communicate the travel policy with them as to what risks that they can take. Are they allowed to go on off-hour trips? Are they allowed to travel alone at night? And highlight these risks that exist with it, as well as identifying the pace of their travel and the challenges and the issues that they may face within there. And if the pace is too much, understanding that you may need to slow down the pace as a travel manager or break up the trip again. So understanding that there is a pre-departure mindset, we need to take into consideration how we're going to prepare the female traveler's mindset and where it all starts and ends. It starts in the very beginning with doing the pre-departure phase, and that becomes with the destination reporting, the medical and security awareness reporting, understanding of the cultural and country norms, understanding that if you have an employee, a female employee who is LGBT, if that is putting them at further risk or if they have a religious belief that's putting them at risk. And having those hard conversations with them, particularly in an area if it's in heightened risk for those identifiers. And if they are in a heightened risk, are you providing them with the ability to say no? Are you giving them that opportunity to say that they don't want to go on that trip? And is there any repercussions that exist with that? Once you understand the pre-departure mindset and you've prepped them in the beginning, you get to understand their travel profile, their capabilities, and their risk thresholds. Again, are they seasoned travelers? Do they have the language capabilities that exist? Are they going to be reliant on translators within the area? And do they have medical issues that need to be identified? Because you may need to pre-identify the appropriate facilities to go to, as well as put any kind of resources or identification in place for them. So a good tip that would exist within that is highlight the emergency phone calls, the numbers that they need to put into their cell phone so they have it ready and available, as well as establish a protocol for how to deal with sexual assault prior to travel. This education and this discussion, while they can be difficult, they are vital to making sure that your female travelers are being the best travelers that they can possibly be for your company and for themselves by highlighting any of the risks, whether it be sexual orientation, high risk of crime or sexual assault, religious orientation, that they have the ability to not only either say no or have the ability to adjust their travel and their hotels and their transportation and their activities to meet those risks and to avoid them. As we start to think about the victimization for the company mindset and the victimization abroad, you need to understand that each company is going to be different in how they handle everything, and that each set of circumstances are going to be very unique. What we know and how to handle assault here in the U.S. is going to be completely different in how to handle assault in Europe or in the Middle East or in Latin America. Understanding the hurdles and the legalities of each country will help you understand and create the protocols for how your females will report the incident, how they will ultimately report the crime, how you as a company will assist them in getting them either out of the country or providing them with security on the ground until you can safely evacuate them out. We need to suspend that the assumption of what we have known to work prior isn't going to work this time. The reason being is that since every country, every situation, every assault, and every traveler is different, it doesn't mean that success in the past is going to equate to success in the future. So as you start to look at your programs and your policies, you need to understand that your response isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all. You need to create the flexibility to respond to the situation at hand. You also it will help you if you adapt a broad and creative approach. Some great ways of doing this is talking to your colleagues in other companies, talking to local organizations, talking to organizations that help with assault in countries that you frequent, and creating that diverse library of information, which will help you help and aid your traveler who is going through an extremely emotional time at this particular time frame. One of the things, while unfortunately sexual assault and assault are extremely emotional events that occur, the wrongdoings that go will put the female into an extremely emotional, stressful state. And knowing this, that this is such an emotional state, and it's a convergence of events, the traveler may not be thinking straight. And if they're not thinking straight, they may not know how to ask for support. So by doing that, they're going to have these feelings of isolation. They're going to feel as if they don't have a resource to turn to, and it can equate into a culture shock of what they're going through. Not only the shock of the trauma, and that there may be medical or physical ramifications and security ramifications that go within it, then it's the shock of being in a culture that they don't know and they don't understand. They may not speak the languages, so it starts to add to their travel stress. So beginning with stress of travel to begin with, an add-on stress of the travel, that of the assault, and now you have a woman or a man on the verge of an emotional precipice. They may not have the knowledge to look for support, social support, and they may not have that familiar knowledge of the local support systems that they have. So all of these pieces are starting to converge for you, and as you sit in a foreign country trying to help and assist them, you need to understand that each piece of this is going to be a volatile piece for the person that has experienced that, and how you will send assistance. It may be that you look into your travel management policy and you look to identify if they can send over somebody to be their escort home, or to be a security provider for them while they're in country, to help bring them to medical exams. These are all pieces that you might want to think about as you look into how you report to sexual assault. Another piece of the cultural shock that they may experience is that not every country is going to perform rape kits in the manner that you were accustomed to in either the U.S. or your home country. And by doing that, it may make them feel assaulted one more time again. So by having an open communication and having the proper dialogue before they go, it will help you in the unfortunate experience that you have to help them during a situation while they are abroad. One of the things that you can do to help them have a successful trip is to help prepare them both mentally and physically. By doing that, you can create these actionable steps which can strengthen your travel policies. Travel risk management has been a growing industry by leaps and bounds, and the TRM company can provide you with the data for the traveler before they leave. I challenge you within your travel program to go back and take that data and to have the conversation with your travelers, and not only just give them the information, because it's great information, but it's useless if they don't read it. So if you take these traveler pre-check assessments and the education and the destination reports, and then have the conversation with the employee and challenge them to say, do you understand the risk that you're going into? Do you understand how these risks will affect you? And then go back and think about you as your company. Are you being proactive? And proactive isn't just giving them the destination reports, but proactive is providing them with the education, the tools, the training to travel overseas. But it's also being proactive in having the conversations and understanding where your travelers' risk levels are, and are they comfortable with the location that they're going into. Or are you being reactive in just providing them with the reports and then waiting to see if something was to occur, then establishing a travel protocol? Having these conversations will help you understand if you have questions on, what is the full journey management of that person's travel? Are they able to travel at night? What level of risk is acceptable? What level of communication should they have, and what is the proper communication protocol? Are they able to understand where the local car services are, or what the local 911 equivalent is? Keeping all of these essential documents, and actually them packing their essential documents, their passports, their visas, their medical records, all of these will help them within that successful trip. But going back and taking your pre-trip assessments, your education, your destination reports, and utilizing them as a sounding board for your next level of conversations is imperative, and it is invaluable beyond belief. It will help you and your travelers tenfold to continue on with a safe travel management system and safe journey management. Each company is going to take and look at how they prepare their female travelers, and they're going to look at it under a different lens. These are some examples as to how certain companies have taken this education system and put it towards their female travelers. You may be a little bit different, but having just knowledge that companies are doing things to highlight that there are risks to travel for both men and women, but there are also increased risks for women within travel. So providing education is paramount to them. You can go as you can create a 4-hour training class session, or even create continual training sessions for all of your travelers that are traveling. Hold it as a women-only course and have the discussions about the risks and some of the risk awareness that they need to have, and some of the tools that they may utilize. For example, they may be able to sit behind the driver, bring in a doorstop, travel in pairs, or use the proper protocol for communication. Another organization has hired a female to cover the travel for women abroad. Understanding female risks and understanding the scenarios that they may go into, having a female understand that will help for this company to facilitate in the proper trip management. As well as some companies are going through and having videos created and reviewing of specific scenarios and recommended responses for them. All of these are all just tools and tips that you can utilize. You can go back and creatively brainstorm with your group as to how are you going to educate and how are you going to prepare your travelers and what works best for your company. You might actually utilize your travel risk management company to go through and have the discussion about the women in travel, or even within LGBT training for them. What should they look out for in particular countries or in particular areas with religious beliefs. Some of the things that I'd like for you guys to take and when you consider some takeaways for you is, does your company travel policy put the female traveler at risk? Are you putting them in a scenario where they are in hotels that are not in the most appropriate areas of the city? Are you having them take cabs which aren't the best way to travel around for their known kidnap and ransom? Are you putting them where they need to travel by themselves in a country that a solo female traveler is looked poorly upon? Do you understand your travelers' profiles and their risk tolerance to each of your traveling employees? If you don't, start to think about how you're going to create that library of profiles, as well as how are you going to create the education system around traveling. And then create that pre-trip, during travel, and post-travel debrief session. By doing that, it's creating a proactive event and having you have the ability to talk about the threat assessment of the destinations that they're in. And then the post-travel debrief will allow you to understand where you can book their travel to. If certain hotels that you deemed were safe were actually in horrible locations, you may take them off your travel list. Some of those other pre-travel sessions may be where you continually educate them and have a seasoned female traveler have the conversation with them about how to travel. Another thing to consider is, what is your organization's communication protocol, and are they robust enough? How are you tasking your employees to communicate to you? Are you tasking them to GPS check-in when they land at the airport? Are you tasking them to check in at the hotel? Or is it part of your travel policy for them to call you and let you know that they're going on an off-hours trip so that you have the understanding of where they're going? It's not so much that you want to watch their every step. It's that you want to take the best safety measures for them and understand what is going on in the area that they're in. So if they do go on an off-hours trip and an alert occurs in the area that they're in, you have the ability to alert them as to the situation of where they are, as well as alert them to the fact you may need to evacuate them out or provide assistance to them. You need to start thinking about what your organization's transportation protocols are. Are you allowed to use rideshare programs? Are you utilizing trains, cabs, and buses, or are you allowing them to self-drive? Some of these, some rideshare programs are banned from companies because they don't feel as if they're a safe way or the drivers are vetted enough. Other companies will encourage rideshare programs so that they have a GPS location as their entire trip. Are you allowing somebody to rent a car after a long-haul flight and self-drive themselves to a location? Is that putting them at risk for a car accident? Is that putting them at risk to have their personal property stolen? Are these things that you need to start to think about, as well as what is your protocol off of taking cabs and buses, and how do they report these? You also should review your crisis response program and provider. Start to identify those gaps and triggers for evacuation and support. I'll go back to the Hurricane Katrina example that I brought earlier. A lot of companies will not provide support in the event of a natural disaster, as well as a lot of companies will not provide support in the event that it's a domestic event. So those two triggers would not have been met. And if you actually had a female employee that was stuck in New Orleans and in the Superdome, it not only became an evacuation event, it became a security event because of the high risk of sexual assault that was occurring within the Superdome. So looking at your program and your TRM providers and looking at the actual policies that they exist, it will help identify the gaps to how your company travels and how your female travelers and your male travelers act, and how you're going to actually be able to support them should they be in any of those scenarios, especially if there's a gap within your policy. And I go back to the continual training for your travelers and your program managers and how to travel safely. You can provide them with all of the information out there, but how are you training them on it? How are you training them on whether or not their sexual orientation, their gender, their religious beliefs are going to affect them in particular countries? How are you training them on that, how to handle those situations? How are you training them on how to handle extended long trips, as well as how are you training them as to how to handle the risks that exist and how they should properly communicate them back to you. And then one of the last piece that I would like to bring up is 5 things that you can do right now. These are things that you can go back and take to your desk and see if your policies are working with it, if it's not working with it, if it's not in conjunction with your company policy. You can review those pre-trip assessments and the communications that you're providing to your travelers. Review what kind of information that you're getting. Review the information for any kind of event alerts, any kind of emergency notifications. Start to understand what that communication policy is, as well as that pre-trip assessment policy. Establish a Train Your Traveler training program, especially with women. Establish a program where you can go through and train them as to how to properly travel, how to avoid risks, how to understand the risks of the countries that they're going into, and how to speak up and tell you that it's not safe where they are, or if something were to occur, to train them as to how to actually properly communicate that to you so that you can help facilitate getting them home and getting them home safely, and help facilitate with the care and the medical treatment as needed. You can also review and analyze your risk management program, and does it meet your needs? Is it meeting all of your company needs, especially in the manner to which you guys travel? And you can create a pre-trip assessment protocol. Have a checks and balances. Have you provided them with all of the information, and then have you actually had the conversation with them and had them respond back to you, and especially with any concerns or fears that they may have going into that location. And the last thing that you can take away right now is that you can ensure that you are able to monitor and communicate with your travelers abroad. Find out if you actually have a communication ability for them, and how are you actually monitoring where they're going. That will help you to understand if you have any lack of transparency in their travel. Some overseas resources that you may want to utilize. These are all resources which can help you understand the risks that your female travelers may face, how to act, what resources that you can go to if something were to occur, as well as to understand the legalities of particular countries. And then one of the final pieces is providing that situational awareness for your traveler. I continually go back to the inform, educate, and communicate. Inform, educate, and communicate. You need to continually do that during the trip so that they are continually kept abreast of any kind of risks that they may be facing, or any kind of threats that are increasing in the areas that they're in. I'd like to thank you very much for spending this time with me, especially on International Women's Day. I would also encourage you to continue on to the second part of our series, where Maria Teresa will review on-the-ground situational awareness and how to actually help mitigate the risks, as well as what to do if a situation were to occur. Thank you very much, and if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me at the email listed, and I'll be more than happy to continue the discussion with you.